Nintendo was a handheld powerhouse, and what I thought I'd do today is share Nintendo portables from best to worst. I recently did a video talking about Nintendo consoles and did the same thing. The link will be below to that video. And I've done many other Nintendo videos on my channel. If you're new, hit that like and subscribe button and click the bell as I'm doing videos every week. Had a lot of fun with the last video, and so I had a lot of requests doing, well, what about Nintendo handhelds and portables? I gathered all 8 variations of Nintendo portables that they've done over the years. I kind of grouped a couple things together, and before I start this list, I want to talk about some kind of parameters that I'm doing with this list. First and foremost, I'm not counting backwards compatibility. I'm just focusing on each handheld's library, the functions that the device itself had, lasting impact on the industry, popularity of the time, and popularity overall. Your list is going to be different than mine possibly, and that's okay. We can still be friends. These lists are going to determine on age, influence, how much experience you've had with each handheld. First up, I'm going to pick Game Boy. Of course, Game Boy to me is so iconic for Nintendo handheld. It had a huge impact on the industry, especially portable gaming. The Game Boy was technologically kind of inferior to other companies that try to compete with it over time. It destroyed its competition. It had an amazing library of games. You know, Mario, Metroid, and Zelda games are all represented, as well as countless others. I remember hearing the original commercial for the Game Boy as they were advertising it as a portable Nintendo. This is something that I eventually got, and my parents loved it because I could play on a tiny little screen and they could watch TV. We only had one TV at the time in our house. It was a huge success. The Game Boy dominated sales for over a decade. Next up is the DS. Nintendo Dual Screen was adaptation and evolution of the Game Boy Advance. I think it knocked it out of the park. Taking some ideas from going back to the Game & Watch series, I think the dual screen will fondly be remembered. Now, that first version of the DS was terrible, but the DS Lite is such a great design and played quite a bit. There were so many great games coming out for the DS. Yes, it was a popular handheld and it did have a lot of shovelware. But if you dig a little bit into this library, the DS and all the versions of the DS, it was the one handheld that everybody in my family has owned. Next up is the Game & Watch series. Now, there was 60 of these made back in the day, and then really without Game & Watch, you wouldn't have the dual screen. You wouldn't have Nintendo. It really was an early success for Nintendo when they were doing electronics and put them on the map. To me, the Game & Watch series is iconic. It's still being represented. They recently just came out with a kind of an homage to it with the Super Mario Brothers Game & Watch this last Christmas. I did a video on that. I love the Game & Watch series. I love collecting the Game & Watch series. It was a pocket-sized handheld series that lasted a long time on batteries. It had a built-in clock feature, took iconic Nintendo characters, lasted over a decade. For me, I grew up with the Super Mario Brothers Game & Watch, and I remember getting it at a thrifty drugstore. Definitely needs to be high on the list because it's still influencing the industry and the handhelds to this day. Next up is the Game Boy Advance. I waited in line at a Kmart when the Game Boy Advance came out in 2001. It was a day one purchase for me and the very first Nintendo portable that I got on day one, and absolutely loved it. I was a huge Metroid fan. It had 2 great Metroid games on it. To me, even though it's a 32-bit processor, it's kind of like a portable Super Nintendo. And Super Nintendo, if you didn't see my other video, was really high on my list as well. So I really like the Game Boy Advance. It was an excellent handheld. And to me, it was like the true evolution of the original Game Boy. Next up is the 3DS. Now, the Nintendo 3DS, I think, is going to be overshadowed by other Nintendo handhelds, but I still think it holds up. Now, some people would look at this and say, well, it's kind of a DS with a 3D gimmick. I think eventually it established itself as its own success. All these portables that I talk about today, minus one, are going to be very successful. And the 3DS really established itself. It was out nearly a decade. It really helped Nintendo financially, especially with the Wii U struggling. The 3DS was a huge success for them. There was many franchises that they continued to have both on the Wii U and the 3DS. There's a lot of people out there. I know you Pokemon fans out there love your 3DS games. And, Nintendo just knocked it out of the park with the 3DS. Now, for me, I have played a lot on the dual screen. And when the 3DS came out, I eventually got one. I didn't get one when they came out. I waited, and I got eventually a 3DS XL. At the end of its life, I got a 2DS XL. And so when they kind of drifted away from the 3D games, that's really when I started to get into the 3DS library. I don't think I fully appreciated the 3DS. I still think it's going to hold a lot of merit and value to people, especially maybe people younger that grew up with it and had more time to appreciate it. But overall, I think that the 3DS is a good handheld, but I didn't play it as much. It'll definitely be kind of the middle of the road remembered for Nintendo handhelds. And this is controversial. I'm going to put the Switch Lite, because the Switch Lite is a true portable. Even though the Switch is portable as well, I included that on another list. So I'm just going to put the Switch Lite. So if you just count the Switch, it might be higher on your list. I think the Switch as a handheld is going to be fondly remembered. I think one thing that's going to hold it back is, especially with the Switch Lite, is going to be that drift issue. And so there is an issue right now with the with the drift of the analog sticks. But if you just look at the library, I think this is more than just an Android handheld. This is really Nintendo refining kind of what they've done with their other successes, putting it together into a wonderful handheld. Now, studies show that people play their Switch more in handheld mode than in dock mode. And I think that the Switch is truly the evolution of Nintendo taking a lot of iconic things. And, I think it's a great handheld. I think it does a good job. It's still coming out with games. It's not over with. I think there's going to be another evolution of the Switch Lite. I think they're going to make a better version of it. And I think with that being said, it might possibly surpass Game Boy Advance and especially even, high up, maybe in the top part of this list for some. I know for some people out there, it's going to be number one. I'm going to say the Switch Lite is good. It can be better. I want to see it get a different version and hopefully fix that Joy-Con drift issue that some are reporting with this. Now, this one's a tough one because all these that I'm talking about are successful. Doesn't mean they're bad. Which is the best? Nintendo handhelds are fantastic. And so what's next on the list? It's Game Boy Color. To me, the Game Boy Color coming out in 98, I was knee-deep in PlayStation games. And so I also am not a big Pokemon fan. Now, for Pokemon fans out there, your Game Boy Color is going to be huge. Game Boy Color was, to me, coming out at that same time. It really revitalized the whole Game Boy franchise. And, it came out and was a huge hit, adding additional microprocessor and offering its own unique games. For me, the Game Boy was good enough, and eventually I got a Game Boy Pocket. And the Game Boy Color came out. To me, it was just a slight upgrade. For others, it was a huge deal. It was your first handheld, and you're going to have it higher on the list. For me, it's number 7. As something I didn't play as much. I went back and revisited, but I played a ton more Game Boy games, and I think that was a huge influence. But the Game Boy Color, being in color, the big complaint of the original Game Boy was that it was monochrome. Game Boy Color coming out fixed that. For many people, it was a huge advancement. For me, I didn't play it as much, and I think it's going to be overshadowed by the original Game Boy and kind of a mid-tier between a Game Boy and a Game Boy Advance. That's leaving number 8, which many people are going to be in agreement, I think, and that's the Virtual Boy. The Virtual Boy is on this list and not a console because it's technically a portable. It can run off batteries. Even though it's not super portable, it still kind of is. And so the Virtual Boy, it also has its own screen. And so Virtual Boy is something of an anomaly and, dismal sales. But I think the Virtual Boy really kind of set up the idea of moving forward with functions that were in the 3DS. If you didn't have a Virtual Boy, you wouldn't have a 3DS. It had a unique controller design. I think that some of the things of Virtual Boy eventually were utilized in other Nintendo handhelds. And even though it's 8th, and even though it had terrible sales, I think it had some great games, and it's a great thing to experience if you can find one. I know they're fairly expensive now. They're pretty hard to find. There's some hardware issues where the stand, where the visor connects to the stand, there's a part there that typically cracks. They're kind of fragile. They go out. The screens themselves have to be restored. But the Virtual Boy is something of an iconic Nintendo. I know it's kind of the butt of many jokes, and a lot of people say it was terrible. I don't think it's a terrible portable. I just think it's number 8. Do your list in the comments, and I would love to hear what you think of my list. You're going to have different opinions. Let's just be respectful, and let's keep it positive. Thank you for the ongoing support as I march past 100,000 subscribers. I'm having a lot of fun on my channel and doing many different types of videos and conversations. Hit the like and subscribe button and click the bell as I'm uploading videos every week. You folks are wonderful and beautiful. Thank you so much for the ongoing support. This is the Immortal John Hancock, and you take care.